Hi, folks, and welcome to Journalism 460 Media Ethics. This is just a greeting video where I'm going to introduce myself, touch on a few key points of the syllabus, and explain a little bit of what the course is about, and also give you something to think about regarding kind of the extraordinary events that have happened over the last couple weeks in the country and how to look at them through the lens of media ethics, or what I think is a major issue that's come up that has to do with media ethics with everything that's been going on. So let me start by saying my name is Julian Gorbach. A lot of my students in the past have called me Dr. G. Um, I was a newspaper reporter for about 10 years in several different states. I was a reporter, kind of a crime reporter. I covered a lot of gang killings and that kind of thing in New Mexico to get as a start. And then I was in South Louisiana, in Lafayette, Louisiana, where I also did police reporting, but I also covered the environment a lot and a bunch of other issues. And then I was a reporter in New York City and in Florida, like in the Florida Keys, and in Massachusetts, and I've done stories in San Francisco and elsewhere. So, and for the past, since about 2008, I've been writing and reporting, or writing and publishing as a media historian. So I have a book out, and a lot of what I write about is through a historical lens, but it delves pretty deeply into issues or questions of media ethics. So that's who I am. You're welcome to call me Julian or Dr. G, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And let me tell you a bit about the course itself. So I'm going to pull up the syllabus here. And I'm just gonna, a lot of what is in here is, I think, pretty clearly explainable here on the syllabus itself and also on La Lima. So I'm just gonna touch on a few key points. I guess one of them is that I'm going to be using not just the textbook, but other textual materials, like other readings, some of which are from textbooks, a lot of them are not. I'm also going to be using podcasts or parts of podcasts and probably video. In fact, definitely video. So it's going to be a mix of stuff. The book provides us, the textbook Media Ethics Issues and Cases provides us some really good structure, and I like the case studies. I feel like with some of the broader topics, we can do a better job if I provide some readings to share with you. And there are parts to pretty much everything that we'll be covering in the course that are in the textbook, so you always have that as a reference. But I'm going to assign things each week that I think may be better in cases where, not in all cases, but in some of the cases. So that's the story with the readings. The other stuff about the grade breakdown is both, the kind of the meat and potatoes of the class is going to be this case analyses and discussion points, and your term paper, which we'll do in 2 drafts. So with all of that, that's just about writing about cases, and the cases of or in the situation with the case analyses and discussion points. It's discussion posts. We'll be doing that on the forum, the La Lima forum. So there will be discussion between all of you guys. That'll be a back and forth. And then that just leaves the quizzes. As far as the quizzes go, I'll be putting the first one of those up there within the next few days. These are going to be multiple choice quizzes that I'm going to have to put together based on the readings and the multimedia material that I'll be putting together for the course. So that's the grade breakdown. As far as the overall themes and structure of the course, I just direct you to this, very brief tentative course schedule that I put together. So we're going to go through, we've been doing the introductions this week, so you know about that. We'll be covering, just like what it says, the mission of the free press and democracy, objectivity, undercover deception, and the role of images in the media, in news reporting. So I picked these both because these are fundamental pillars of sort of ethical questions or the kinds of ethical dilemmas that journalists face, and also because I thought that within each of these topics, we could find some really interesting and engaging dilemmas to confront. One of my main priorities in choosing these was that I really wanted to make sure that I was giving you stuff that was very much real world, because reporters today are facing a lot of tough ethical decisions all the time. And it's easy, I think, with these ethical issues change from year to year. I mean, over the years, really. So that even a book that's 2 or 3 years old or 4 or 5 years old may not have ethical issues to confront you with that are really what's front and center in our time today. And what I found is that, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, I mean, there have always been difficult ethical questions for reporters to wrestle with, and you tend to be wrestling with them all the time when you're doing the job. But I think the last, since 2016 or so, since the beginning of what we might call the Trump era, the questions have gotten much more intense, and journalists have had to think much more deeply and confront much tougher and more urgent and bigger questions about what they're doing and why they're doing what they do. So that is why I came up with these basically 4 topic areas that we'll be covering. So, okay, that's pretty much everything I have to say about the syllabus and the structure of the course. If you guys have any questions, for example, about how I'll be evaluating your posts on the cases that you choose and your responses, feel free to email me and ask me questions. Or if you have any other questions about the course, either the grading of the course or how it's set up or what we're doing, please don't hesitate to send me an email. You'll also see here that I've left you my cell phone number, which, if it's during the work days, you're welcome to call. You're also welcome to set up an appointment to meet with me on Zoom in my office, on campus, or we could talk over the phone. So I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to have meetings with you. So I really welcome you guys to reach out to me to do that. It's a good way to learn. So, okay, without further ado, I do want to bring up what's been going on in the news over the last couple of weeks and what that has to do with the media ethics course. What I really think it's important for you guys to give some thought to while this is going on. I mean, one of the things that all university professors confront is whether or not it's a good idea to bring things that are breaking news, that are in the news at the moment, into the classroom. A lot of teachers or professors see this stuff and they think, oh, this is like a really teachable moment. And lots of things that happen in the news might be really good teachable moments. The downside of introducing news into the classroom often is that because these things are so immediate and there's so much concern about them and there's so many strong feelings about them, it can lead to a lot of confusion, passions, and the whole agenda of the classroom kind of going off the rails. So there's a lot of downsides, and there's a lot of concern with the idea of just ripping something from the headlines and bringing it to your students in class and saying, "Oh, we're going off the regular schedule. We're going to spend the day in class on this." But this is a journalism class. This is a class about media ethics in the news, and this is a week that you are going to remember for the rest of your lives. It's going to change what happens in this country for many years to come. So we are at kind of an extraordinary moment in history, a turning point in history. I'm talking about what happened with the presidential debate, which was scheduled so unusually in June, so early in the calendar of a presidential race, and just what many viewers and pundits have called a complete disaster for the president. And a lot of people now are extremely concerned about Donald Trump getting elected. There's a lot of fear about how he might change the country and what he might do with it. But what I want to focus on is what role the media has played in this, and in particular, I want to zoom in on a remarkable role that the New York Times has played in all of this, and to get you really thinking about what, from an ethical point of view, why are you becoming a journalist and what is the mission of journalism? And so to begin with, there's this discussion in Semaphore about this question of when this happened, when we saw Joe Biden having such difficulties expressing himself, having a really hard time putting together a coherent speech in the middle of the debate, or any coherent speeches, his inability to fact check Donald Trump and to really prosecute the case against Donald Trump, his mouth hanging open, just the visual images of his mouth hanging open, kind of a stare into nowhere that he was giving. There were just some serious concerns about about the President Joe Biden's condition, and whether he really is too old, both for this candidacy and for to be president for another 4 years. And the images of him on live television in that debate, which were seen by 50 million people, seem to have really done, like, they've deeply wounded his campaign and deeply hurt his chances of being able to beat Donald Trump in the November election. And so a lot of Democrats and a lot of people who are concerned about Trump because they're concerned he's a threat to democracy and that he's kind of a convicted felon running amok, are now in the word panic has been thrown around a lot. I think that whether you think that's a fair way to describe the way people are feeling about it, certainly they are deeply concerned. There's a lot of anger at Joe Biden, and there's a lot of questions of whether he has any chance of winning against Trump, and whether in fact, and this is particularly extraordinary, whether in fact he really needs to step down. So we seem to be at this precipice where over the next week, there may be this intense effort to get him to step down from the presidency. Now, what is the role of journalism or journalism ethics in all of this? Well, one of the things that's come up when we saw this kind of state that Biden was in was a lot of people were saying, why weren't we warned about this? Why wasn't there a more serious effort to challenge Joe Biden on his decision to seek re-election? Why were so many people shocked to see the kind of state that he was in when we saw him at that debate, with him having difficulty speaking? It seems like we were gaslit, or there had been this real effort to suppress the truth about his condition. And what about the role of journalists in this? Should they have brought us this story sooner? Why didn't they bring this story sooner? Were we left in the dark? Were they gaslit? Were they gullible? Were they too compliant? What's going on? This is Jill Abramson. She's this quote that I have up here. This is a statement she made for this forum or discussion they had about this issue that was on Semaphore, which is kind of a national political publication. And she says here, it's clear that the best news reporters in Washington have failed in the first duty of journalism, to hold power accountable. It is our duty to poke through White House smokescreens and find the truth. The Biden White House clearly succeeded in a massive cover-up of the degree of the president's feebleness and his serious physical decline, which may be simply the result of old age. Shame on the White House press corps for not to have pierced the veil of secrecy surrounding the president. Okay, one of the questions that she's speaking about quite and giving her answer on this quite definitively is what is the role of journalism, and what does that have to do with this situation, and how did the journalists do or did not do? Her point is it's the first duty of journalism to hold power accountable. Another way to look at that might be we live in such a tribal society. So much of the mainstream press in Washington and elsewhere is liberal, and whether they come out and say it or not, are Democrats, or certainly vote Democratic. And so at a time when we live in such a tribal society in particular, the Democrats and the liberal side of the political spectrum is really their tribe for these people. And I would argue another way to look at maybe one of the main missions of the press is to take on your own tribe, to take on your own side. Because arguably what a number of these people are pointing to when they say we were left in the dark, the press didn't push hard enough, is that there wasn't enough oxygen in the reporting and in the debate over the Biden administration. And I would argue that the president's decision to seek re-election was just one decision. I wonder if there was really enough robust debate or skepticism about a number of his foreign policy decisions. I mean, certainly his handling of the war in Gaza and his relationship with Israel has gotten a lot of attention, and there's been a fair amount of debate about that. You all might disagree. You might think that press has been as pliant on that as on anything else, and you might be right. But certainly there's a lot of other choices he's made about his handling of Ukraine, about the Inflation Reduction Act, about the way he's handled the Supreme Court and Supreme Court reform, about voting rights, about abortion, about a whole host of things. And so the question is, should the press have been tougher on Joe Biden? Should they have asked harder questions? Should there have been more robust debate within the press about all of this? And I want to give you as a case study of, just in terms of the decision to seek re-election, the role that the New York Times has played. So when I say, Jill Abrams says the first duty of journalism is to hold power accountable, I might offer another idea of that, is that the first duty of you as journalists is to hold your own side accountable, to be as tough on whatever biases you have, to be as tough on the people that are sort of in your camp or on your side of most arguments, and to look at them as harshly as possible. And I mean, maybe by way of background or explanation of this, I should explain that my dissertation, which ended up becoming my first book, was called Crying in the Wilderness. And crying in the wilderness is actually a term that comes from the tradition of the Hebrew prophets and Jewish history. And what it refers to is that the prophets in when during the days of the land of the Jewish kingdom, when there were actually two Jewish kingdoms of Judea and Israel, the prophets of those days, the ancient Jewish prophets, when they would go out to essentially preach, they would get out of the city, get out of the kingdom, and be in the wilderness. And they would point their ire, they would point their wrath, not at the Philistines or at the Babylonians, who they thought were beyond reach. They would point their criticisms at their own people, at what were supposed to be in Judaism the chosen people, because these were the people that were supposed to know better. And these were the people that had failed to uphold their covenant with God. So that is the religious context of that phrase, crying in the wilderness. But in the 20th century, a lot of journalists and artists took up that credo, that idea of crying in the wilderness, that idea of taking on your own side as their kind of role or their kind of mission. So up until a certain point in our pretty modern history, this was a very strong tradition, and there were a number of great journalists who did it, and we tended to call them iconoclasts because they would shatter the images we had of the people we all admired. The book that I wrote about, which was originally, the dissertation called Crying in the Wilderness, was a man who really made his place in history. He had been a reporter, and he ended up during the Holocaust becoming an activist, and he took on the most popular politician of them all. He took on Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so that really set this model of like, take on your own side. And so it's worth looking at as maybe an example of one outlet crying in the wilderness or doing that right, what the New York Times has done over the past couple of years. So if you look, this is the list of stories of the New York Times Siena poll. And they started publishing, they were basically started crusading which is a term we use when a paper focuses on a topic that they really want to hammer home, a subject that they are really passionate about, they want to see some change about. And essentially what the New York Times did was they crusaded about this decision Joe Biden made to seek re-election. So if you go back as early as November, which, okay, it would have been by this time pretty much too late for Biden to get out of the race. But here's a story about the polls from November of 2023. Trump now leads Biden. And what you'll see is if you look over the last months since last November, the New York Times' front page did story after story after story of the president lagging in the polls, questions coming out in the polls. You'll notice most of these don't have to do with age. They just have to do with the fact that Biden was slipping behind Trump. He was losing to Trump, right? This is from, again, still in November. Most voters don't see a thriving economy. These are saying, the swing states are in trouble. These are saying young voters don't like Biden. These are saying, black voters, he's not popular with especially younger black voters. And then by December, there were all the controversies over Gaza. People started wondering if there was any way to get off this train. This is now by May. This is by March. They're starting to say, nope, the Biden team is determined to stay with Biden. And what I'm getting at is, this was the story in the Siena Times. What I'm getting at is that all of this started to really ratchet up the pressure on Biden to have that debate in June, which is an extremely early time to have a debate. If you're wondering, why did his election team decide to have the debate that early? Was it just the polls in themselves? in themselves? Well, that's unlikely. The New York Times was really out front about this. And if we go back to this original kind of discussion with Semafor, here's a senior New York Times journalist saying, these days, the most vociferous Times critics are the left. We continue to get no end of blowback for our coverage of Biden's age, even as a polling question. That, coupled with the dubious reporting on how Sulzberger was upset at Biden for not granting access and so ordered the newsroom to go hard on him, look at his age, etc., has become the boilerplate of angry note filling inboxes. So I don't know if you all have noticed this. I don't know how much you have been following the news, but if you've been following the news, then you would find that the New York Times has been taking an extremely high amount of heat for this stuff. And it's not just these, I've just been talking about the news pages. If you look at the opinion pages, this is Charles Amblo in November of 2023, okay? But going back earlier, as early as 2021, now Bret Stephens on the opinion page is a conservative, right? But he is very much an anti-Trump, they would call maybe a never Trumper. He's been and that's why the New York Times hired him several years ago, is because although he does have conservative perspectives on things, he's vehemently, passionately anti-Trump. And so but he also started to turn against Biden as early as 2021, which is, if you think about it, really early in Biden's presidency, right? But he was followed by as early as 2022 by, like, for example, Maureen Dowd on the opinion page and Michelle Goldberg on the opinion page, who's very liberal and very much to the left. And she wasn't really coming at Biden from the left. She was concerned about this age question. And Frank Bruni was another columnist. And then there have been very few and far between, but there have been other columnists at other papers, like David Ignatius with the Washington Post, who wrote this column in 2023. There are 2 points I would make about why I'm showing you all these columns by opinion writers. One is that I've heard from a lot of my students them be very dismissive about the role that opinion plays in journalism. But I think as you guys maybe already know, or you may learn if you haven't learned it yet as you go forward, it is essential for people to argue about what's in the news. And so opinion writing and opinion journalism, which often involves a lot of reporting, is really essential in the whole media ecosystem. Now, it's one thing to just have, to blast out propaganda, like what you may think you're seeing and hearing 24/7 on the cable news channels, but it's another thing to do the reporting. And so when Michelle Goldberg or any of these people are going to make an argument that, I don't think this is a good idea, she's going to be doing her research and backing up her arguments with evidence. And so anyway, I mean, I think that we are now in a dilemma where the whole Democratic Party is fighting it out over whether Joe Biden should step aside or not. Some people are saying if he does, that'll be disaster because it'll be so unstable and chaotic when we have to be unified and go into an election and we're breaking apart. Other people say after that disastrous debate that night, there is absolutely no chance he can win. They're pulling the emergency, they're breaking the glass for emergency, and they're saying he needs to step down this week. So there's that political debate that's going on, but at the same time, there really is this question of, did the media fail us? Did the liberal media that's been taking the side of Joe Biden the whole time, did they fail to ask the right question? Did they fail to reveal the truth or to tell the truth to the American people? And what responsibility does the news media have in this crisis, and what might turn into a calamity in November? So I've been maybe long-winded in explaining that whole thing, but this is the beginning of a media ethics class, and so it is really something that I want you guys to think about. It's a good example of the kind of case studies we'll be doing. If you guys want to write to me and tell me whether you'd be interested in debating this, I just think whether you want to debate the question of Joe Biden right now or not, the fundamental debate over what the mission and the role of journalists should be and how important it may be for journalists to, like I said, take on their own side. So if you happen to be liberal or you happen to be a Democrat, the obligation you may have to be just as tough or even tougher on your fellow Democrats or liberals. Is that how you guys see journalism? Does that make sense to you? Let's not say Democrat and liberal. Let's just say take on your own side, how you have to take on your own tribe. Do you agree? Or maybe do you see Jill Abramson's formulation as one that makes more sense to you, that the role of journalists is to, how did she put it? I don't want to say speak truth to power because that's not exactly what she said, to hold power accountable, right? Do you think that's another one? I just raised my idea, this crying in the wilderness one, because I don't think you hear that idea as often as you hear this idea that's kind of summed up in that phrase we hear endlessly, speak truth to power, right? But I think it's a worthy discussion, and I hope you guys want to have it. Email me if you want me to create a case study for it. I do think we could slot this in either as a fundamental thing for our week 2 about democracy, or for a question about objectivity, because there's two different ways to look at objectivity in regard to this. One is to say Joe Biden being old was an objective fact, and what the media failed to do was actually a failure at objectivity. Now that is interesting because I've just shown you all these opinion columns, right, in which they're saying Joe Biden is too old. So another thing I would get you to think about is, start thinking deeply about what objectivity means. And sometimes it's the opinion writers that have to show us the truth, because the truth doesn't just necessarily come down to a laundry list of facts, although facts are essential. There are different kinds of facts, and a lot of what's really important is how we put the facts together to see the truth or to show readers the truth. And so I think that one of the things you want to think about is if we're talking about this, is this an example of objectivity and the importance of being objective? In that sense, personally, I'm very sympathetic with the idea that this is some kind of ideal of objectivity, but I think we need a very nuanced definition of objectivity in order to understand objectivity that way. The other way of looking at it is that this is an example of the role of not of objectivity, but of advocacy journalism, of the fact that the New York Times clearly had an opinion, clearly had a point of view, and we could argue that there's a very much a moral dimension to that opinion, because you could argue that maybe a basis of ethics for them has to do with democracy and how that is for the greater good. But they have an opinion, and they're crusading. They are pursuing a particular point of view and arguing that case to the American public, which is Joe Biden is too old, Joe Biden should step down. So is that a case of this is objectivity? Is this a case of, well, maybe objectivity isn't the ideal model? We need advocacy journalism, or we need a point of view in our journalism. We need passionate journalists that are willing to call out explicitly, even on the news page, right and wrong. What do you think? So anyway, I've gone on a bit of a tear here, but this was pretty much everything I wanted to cover in this hello video, and I hope you found it interesting. And I am now going to proceed with 2 more videos that I am going to make every effort to keep much shorter than this, about the lessons from this week. So thank you very much.